Pete Hegseth came to Congress ready to work, but Jasmine Crockett came to keep him accountable. What happened next astonished everyone. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hegseth, but I need facts, not emotions." That phrase made the room quiet for half a second, so pens stopped moving and chairs stopped squeaking. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't yell. She sounded like someone who was ready, stayed ready, and wouldn't let a famous person on TV with millions of followers run her over. The tension in the room grew like a storm, loud and all at once. After introductions, Republican committee members asked Pete Hegseth to testify on how careless the media is and how it hurts national security. He went off the script. What was supposed to be official testimony quickly transformed. From his chair, Hegseth lectured with confidence about anti-American media cliches, cultural sabotage, and cowardly lawmakers. The people on the right were practically nodding and half smiling, like they were writing sound bites for cable news. But then Crockett leaned forward, with his elbows on the table. Steel, no drama. She asked Mr. Hegseth, taking a break between statements, "Can you tell me where you got that last claim from? Or are we just playing political karaoke this morning?" There was some laughter from behind the press row, although it wasn't too loud. The camera caught Pete's slight body language stutter as he shifted in his seat. "What did she say?" He smiled and said, "Don't take this too seriously." Jasmine wasn't looking up from her notepad. She was flicking through a folder called July 2022 Broadcast Notes Fox Primetime that had tabs. She was coming in for the shift. People often didn't think much of Crockett. But in room 2141 of the Rayburn House office building that morning, she was ready for every dodge, spin, and rhetorical trick in the book. She came to destroy, not just slap back. Pete changed his mind and said he was a worried citizen looking for the truth. He was stopped by Jasmine. "Is Mr. Hegseth saying the same thing you did on June 8th when you declared, 'We don't need journalists who question government power. We need warriors who protect it'?" Boom. Some people raised their eyebrows, while others moved about in their chairs and stared at their phones. One worker looked up at the C-SPAN camera light as if it had gotten brighter. Pete blinked since he hadn't expected her to be so specific so quickly. He said, "I was allegorical, hoping for a way out." Jasmine said gently, "Nice. So, metaphors for national security." "Understood. Just letting this group know that you're speaking figuratively today." Another low laugh spread through the room. It wasn't too loud, but it was clear. Crockett turned the page without smiling or grinning. This was only the beginning. When Jasmine read back his transcripts word for word, the mood began to change. Go back 4 days before the hearing. The ostensible topic of Congress was assessing media responsibility in national security and public trust. At first, it looked like just another political show where people talked to their constituents. Everyone knew there was a trap underneath. There was a reason why committee Republicans chose Pete Hegseth. He wasn't an expert in policy or national security. He was a showman and a military veteran who became a TV personality. He could turn sound bites into firestorms. They wanted someone to cause trouble, attack reporters, and say that the media was ruining American values. If things go well, you might be able to get Jasmine Crockett to lose her cool. She was meant to mess up, get upset, and shoot a video that went viral. Crockett wasn't going to play that game. 3 nights before the hearing, her little D.C. office had a stack of transcripts, 2 iPads, and a set of reading glasses that she only used when no one else was present. Her team spent a week checking Hegseth's assertions about media trust and military intelligence against hours of broadcasts, podcast interviews, and speeches. They weren't just talking, they were making a plan. Is there anything about him changing his mind about Ukraine? Lena, who was 27 years old and a policy wonk from Sacramento, was her assistant. Lena nodded. Yeah. In March 2022, he told Biden to pull all of the soldiers out of Eastern Europe. 4 months later, he told Biden he was weak for not sending additional troops to Poland. Crockett smiled. Print it. I'll use that if he gets too full of himself. She was careful, sharp, on purpose. Instead of just shutting him down, she wanted to get rid of the spin. Pete Hegseth got ready in a different way. He flew into Washington, D.C. the night before the hearing and stayed at the Marriott on 22nd Street. He wasn't scared. He had done a dozen of these, including one in front of the Senate years ago. He could make jokes about TV news. He had a fresh hairstyle, a pre-written opening line, and planned to say Hunter Biden again, no matter what the topic was. He thought of the committee as props or backdrops. He and his friends didn't know that Jasmine Crockett had already made plans for his whole scam. There was no need to guess. For years, she observed him. There was tension, but also courtesy in the opening statements in the hearing room. The chair thanked everyone for coming. Pete read from his notes and said that the media today was being used against the country. He went after investigative reporters, dubbed some journalists ideological saboteurs, and said that D.C. anchors were hurting people's faith in the government. Jasmine didn't say anything. She drew pictures without saying anything. With each syllable she heard, her case would get stronger. Next came the Q&A. An Idaho Republican gave Pete an easy question on how the media is anti-patriotic. He ran with it and said that elite media had left American workers behind. Another questioned Pete if biased news coverage had made the country less safe. He quickly agreed and said that journalists who questioned military activities were helping the enemy. Jasmine had receipts, thus it was his responsibility. She waited anxiously for her mic to turn green. She started by saying, "Mr. Hegseth, what you said today makes it sound like press dissent hurts our national security. But I want to remind you of what you said on June 2nd, 2021, when you praised military whistleblowers for exposing wrongdoing within the military." He looked bewildered, turned the page. "You said sometimes telling the truth means calling out your own, even if it hurts your side politically. Do you remember?" Pete squirmed. "I mean, I'd have to see the whole thing," she said. She showed the transcript. "It's here. Do you want me to read it again?" He slowly understood she wasn't making it up, and instead of answering, he moved his jaw. Crockett was correcting him, but she was also making a map of all the things he couldn't get away from. When Jasmine's microphone lit up for the second time, the mood in the room altered. Pete Hegseth seemed calm, but his voice altered. A little defensive. More serious. He had been sure, but now he was upset. He appeared to realize that she wouldn't fit into his explanation about being emotionally overwhelmed. She leaned in again, speaking softly and slowly. She looked through her folder and said, "Let's talk about your appearance on the Freedom Report podcast. October 2nd, 2022. Are you still calling the American press an enemy within that is more dangerous than any foreign actor?" Pete didn't move, but his jaw set. "Of course. Yes, the press is dangerous when it lies about our troops and leaders and favors globalist interests." Jasmine inclined her head. "In the same interview, you remarked, 'We need a freer press, not a censored one.' So, Mr. Hegseth, which is it? Free or not?" He thought about it for a moment and looked around the room. "Those don't have to be separate." She scowled. People who worked for the committee looked at each other. You could hear the keyboards getting slower. Pete was stuck between standing up for free speech and saying those journalists he disagreed with are a threat to the country. He sought to hurt her personally. Pete straightened his tie and said, "With all due respect, Congresswoman, I'm here as someone who served this country in the military, fought in battle. I am in charge of soldiers." He thought that moment would win him the room. It was a subtle hint that she didn't understand how high the stakes were, that he had sacrificed and she hadn't. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She stood up and added, "And I appreciate your service, Mr. Hegseth. Don't forget that this isn't a deployment, a hearing in Congress. To read the Constitution and hold people accountable for what they say, I don't need a uniform." It hit hard. Some Pete fans drew back, unsure of how to interpret the room's feelings. His veteran card was respectfully, lovingly deactivated. The shift happened. Jasmine chose a folder called Inconsistencies, Public Remarks. "I'd like to go over some things you've said about military intelligence over the past 2 years," she said. because I find it interesting that you criticize media leaks when they involve military operations. Yet just last year, you praised the leak of classified information that supported your political views. Pete looked annoyed. Are you accusing me? No, Mr. Hegseth, she said calmly. Please explain your position. You cheered a 2023 leak that hurt a political rival, but condemned a 2022 leak that hurt you. Are you saying national security only matters when it's politically convenient? The silence grew deeper. Pete lay back, fuming. My goal is to protect this country. That means telling power the truth. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. So do I. I don't change my truth depending on who's in office. That touched home. Someone in the gallery let out a loud breath, like if they were holding their air. Not because people were yelling, but because Pete's arguments were getting hard to follow. He tried to change the subject again to get back on track. Congresswoman, the media is no longer trusted by Americans. That's the real problem, Jasmine said again. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and said, maybe they don't trust it because people like you keep giving them slogans that contradict each other. That was the first big argument. No yelling aloud, no name-calling, just quiet. But he violently destroyed every bullet point he had planned to hit. But Jasmine's next question would be about Pete's credibility, which would ruin everything. The next time Jasmine Crockett took the mic, she looked the same, but the temperature in the room had changed. She was in charge of the pace and slowly building a case. It is crucial for Pete Hegseth to go from answering questions to reacting to them. She started by slowly going to a new page in her notebook. Mr. Hegseth, you've made it clear that you support honesty and openness, right? He nodded slowly. Yes. Great, she said. So let's talk about what you said about the intelligence community's report on Russian disinformation efforts. You said it was a left-wing lie in public. Do you still think that? I said it was exaggerated, Pete responded quickly. It was a way to attack conservatives in politics, Jasmine read on. On April 4th, 2022, you said, you can't trust the CIA and NSA. Period. They're full of partisan hacks and liars. Those were your words. Do you think that's too much now? Pete didn't answer right away. I think a lot of Americans feel the same way, he remarked. She added, that's not what I asked, in a quiet voice. It was like surgery, long enough to make the air heavy but not stop. Pete tried again. Some parts of our intelligence community have clearly shown bias, and instead of criticizing those parts, Jasmine cut in. You painted the whole intelligence community as corrupt. You've painted journalists as enemies. And now you're telling this committee that you're here to speak truth. Her voice hadn't gotten louder, but her tone was tense, like a balloon being squeezed. He was calm, but if he moved the wrong direction, he would explode. Let's change things up a bit, she said. You've accused journalists of working with political operatives. You've said that investigative reporting is just pushing an agenda while pretending to be objective. Do you want to tell this committee how many retractions your own show has made in the last 3 years? Pete added, we've made mistakes like any show. But the mainstream press, no, she interjected. Let's stay on you. You said on air that General Hayden secretly funded left-wing candidates. That was false. You took it back 3 weeks later after a legal threat. That's not just bad reporting, it's also possibly defamatory. And yet here you are telling other people to be honest. Pete didn't answer this time. He moved again in his seat, as if he were looking for a hint from one of the aides behind him. Not a single one. Jasmine kept going. You said before that the American people don't trust the media. Maybe that's because too many of its loudest voices act like political operatives themselves. He tried to turn the tables. You're attacking me because I don't agree with your story, Congresswoman. But I speak for millions of Americans who are sick of being lied to by the elite press and the institutions you protect. Then Jasmine leaned back a little bit. She put her elbows on the table and held her hands together. Mr. Hegseth, with all due respect, you don't speak for the American people. You speak for a network. And networks care about ratings. Not truth. Not policy. Not national security. Just clicks. Silence was worse than words. One of the panelists coughed in an embarrassing way. To get everyone's attention, Pete cleared his throat. Jasmine stayed. She knew that no one would question what she said, but she kept going. She said, "I'm not here to make you feel bad. I'm here to make sure that when someone testifies before this body, when they talk about threats to our country, they come with facts. Not slogans, not recycled outrage." Pete was gazing forward. He stopped grinning. She carefully closed her folder. The secretary of the committee requested a short break and said, "And just so we're clear, holding people accountable isn't an attack. It's our job." People moved papers around and left. People still paid attention to Pete. The reporter whispered to a coworker. A worker looked at their phone, maybe to remember what had happened. None of them knew that Jasmine had one more card to play that Pete couldn't spin, avoid, or see coming. When Pete Hegseth got back to his seat after recess, he looked like he had walked into the wrong room. His tie was a half-inch looser, and instead of walking with confidence, he was now walking with care. He kept looking at the committee table, observing Jasmine Crockett and everyone else as if he were doing math. But Jasmine came back the same. She had her folders in good order. Her voice was steady. But Pete wasn't just on the defensive anymore. He was off balance. Jasmine then took the next step. "I'd like to put on the record a number of financial disclosures related to Mr. Hegseth's production company," said. "Specifically those linked to sponsored content deals with private defense contractors." That was observed. Pete got tense, but not too much. You could see it. The panel went quiet again. The quiet that made you think about what she was going to say. "I have proof here," she said, holding up a printed packet. "It shows that Mr. Hegseth got paid in 2023 to appear on branded media to promote defense expansion while also criticizing oversight spending on those same programs during his broadcasts." Pete raised his hand to stop her. "That's public information, and none of it breaks any laws or rules. I've told you everything. You're trying to make it sound shady." Jasmine looked at him for the first time that day. "No, Mr. Hegseth, I'm trying to make it clear. You criticize government spending while profiting from companies that benefit from that spending. That's not illegal, but it's misleading. And misleading the public, especially under the guise of patriotism, is the exact issue this hearing is about." "This is political theater." "Then stop writing your lines on live TV," someone cried. That statement really hit home. Someone in the background giggled quietly. Pete opened his mouth again, but he didn't say anything. This time, Jasmine depended on silence. She hit him again after turning another page. "You also said on a March 2023 broadcast that you never make money from war. But here are bills your company sent to a weapons maker for over $90,000 in patriotic promotional coverage last year." Pete stopped moving. You could tell she wasn't kidding. She had finished her work. A lot of homework. And now everyone could see it. Trying to pivot again. "I support American businesses. I support our military-industrial base because it keeps us safe," Jasmine stated. "And do you think the American people should know when the person telling them what's patriotic is getting paid to do it?" Pete asked. His voice cracked a little. "You're twisting it." "No," she said. "I'm reading it." The chair of the committee felt uncomfortable because things had shifted, not because Jasmine was out of line. They thought Pete would lead the show, but instead it exposed him. Again, Pete stepped forward to alter the tide. "Do you want to talk about the truth, Congresswoman?" "Okay. Let's discuss about the media's lies about COVID. Let's discuss about the laptop that Hunter Biden owns. Let's talk about the country of Afghanistan. I've been honest about it from the beginning, while people like you protected awful leaders." Jasmine didn't fall for it. "None of those things were the reason you were asked to come here today," he remarked. "You were asked to talk about media responsibility and national security discussions." "What you're doing right now is exactly what I worried about," turning hearings into soundbite carnivals. Pete shook his head, finally showing his anger. She leaned in and said, "You came in here with talking points. I brought records with me. If someone in this room wants to keep acting like those are the same thing, they're part of the problem too." The room felt heavier, more serious. No one talked. Even the Republican committee members, who had mostly ignored Pete, seemed nervous. No one jumped in to save him. This time, no. The real explosion erupted online, not in that room. Pete's lack of control went viral in the end. When the hearing was over, Pete Hegseth had no idea what hit him. The air outside the Rayburn building was hot and sticky. Reporters stood on the sidewalk, flipping through notes and checking Twitter. Jasmine Crockett and her assistant, Lena, talked quietly at the exit as people left. At 1:26 p.m. Eastern Time, a clear 42-second video posted by a Dallas journalist began to spread. Jasmine's last words were, "You came in here with talking points. I came with records." There was no music in the video, and it was all raw film. It spread quickly, getting over 200,000 views in 30 minutes. Crockett Clarity, Fox Meltdown, and Receipts Not Rhetoric became hashtags. Even conservative journalists retweeted it, saying things like, "She did her homework," or "You can't walk into a courtroom with a megaphone and not expect to be cross-examined." Pete's staff tried to get away from it. One of his producers tweeted a recording of the hearing when he talked about media disloyalty within an hour, but it didn't stick. The earlier fire was disregarded. They were watching him burn. Jasmine went back to work, but she wasn't happy. She never looked for the footage, even though her phone kept buzzing. She sat with Lena and went over her notes. "Do you think he will go on Tucker tonight? Will he?" Lena asked. "If he does, he'll lie," Jasmine said. They laughed dryly. They were tired. By the end of the day, the video had been seen by 1 million people. Late-night shows included it in their monologues. Trevor Noah wrote on Instagram, "I just want this kind of calm when someone lies to my face." The responses were especially shocking. Thousands of people who didn't know Jasmine a week ago were quoting, sharing, and comparing her calmness to courtroom legends. Even better, veterans and conservatives commented. "I don't always agree with her," a man said in a film, "but that was a masterclass. She didn't yell. She didn't say anything harsh. She brought proof." He freaked out. Truth doesn't need backing dancers. Jasmine didn't try to get viral. She wasn't showy and never yelled, but she was ready. People can tell when someone is ready. Later that night, Pete joined 2 conservative analysts on a live webcast. He looked tired. They tried to make the hearing seem like a hostile environment and a left-wing setup, but the clips were accurate. No one cut him off, and he wasn't yelled at. Someone with his own words and papers did live fact-checking. Yes, it hurt. What wounded him more? The narrative didn't have a bad guy. Jasmine didn't make fun of him, hit him, or appear angry. She just told the truth and let it speak. The next morning, the Kansas City Post ran the headline, "Crockett dismantles Hegseth in-house hearing with nothing but receipts." Below the headline was a picture of her with her arms crossed and no expression. It wasn't clear that the hearing was stressful, and that was the point. She didn't need to be dominant to win. She won by staying clear even when things got loud. But what happened next wasn't just about one tape. It was about how the hearing showed what happens when flash meets preparation and who actually gets exposed when you hit record. The next morning in Washington, everything seemed different. It wasn't the weather, the traffic, or the regular walk through the Capitol Hill hallways. It was how people moved, like how personnel walked past Jasmine Crockett in the hallways with raised eyebrows and subtle nods. How a few Republican aides looked up as she walked by but didn't say much, not because they didn't want to, but they understood they didn't have a response. The tape had transformed the mood in room 2141, where the hearing had been held just 24 hours before. The janitors put the chairs back and filled the water bottles again as if nothing had happened, but everyone who had been in that room the day before knew better. Something had taken place. something that couldn't be taken back. Crockett had shown that fake outrage was empty. At the same time, Pete Hegseth's camp was in crisis mode. Reports from inside his production crew say they didn't think there would be any major backlash. They thought the exchange would be gone by the weekend, buried under the next big news story or controversy. But it didn't. Instead, major newspapers were reporting statements from Crockett and pointing out how different facts and feelings are. Even worse, conservative news sites couldn't agree on how to deal with it. Some others just disregarded it, while others tried to change the subject by saying Pete was being targeted by a radical communist with an agenda. But that didn't work either because the video didn't back it up. Jasmine hadn't shown off. She hadn't said anything unpleasant about anyone. She was just ready and made Pete face his own record. Some members of the committee expressed their anger behind closed doors. Who the hell scheduled him? One Republican was heard questioning in a private meeting later that day. We gave her a win on a silver platter. And in a way, that's exactly what occurred. Crockett didn't win by chance. She didn't fall into it by accident. She made plans, studied, and carried them out. Her team realized that the hearing was going to be a trap. That's why they didn't simply bring things to talk about. They brought proof. Emails sent within the company, transcripts of podcasts, and disclosures made by the company. They even made a spreadsheet that compared what Pete said on the air to real policy facts from legislative reports. It wasn't just a response, it was an audit. And now that the aftermath was starting to happen, a greater discourse was starting. News anchors started to raise tougher questions, such as what the threshold is for expert testimony in hearings like these. Should those in the media who have financial conflicts be able to have an impact on talks about national security? And why did a House committee hire a political commentator instead of an experienced intelligence officer? There were more and more queries. The next day, Jasmine talked about it at a news briefing in her normal calm way. I don't care about scoring points, she added. I care about keeping the public safe from voices that pretend to inform while hiding behind slogans. If you're going to talk about national security, you better act like it matters. It's that simple. No drama. Just being clear. On the other hand, Pete wasn't saying much anymore. His team took him off of scheduled radio interviews. He didn't go to a speaking event in Phoenix. They were attempting to let things calm down and hope the internet would move on. But people weren't going on with their lives. A teacher from Spokane produced a video showing how she utilized the hearing footage in her civics class to teach pupils about being responsible. A former Marine posted it on Facebook and said, I don't care what party you're with. She did what every leader should do. Ask hard questions and make people answer them. Even within the House, the whispers began to change. People who used to see Jasmine as just another progressive voice started to see her in a new light. She wasn't simply pushy, she was precise. What hurt the most wasn't her tone or even her facts, it was her control. Pete's slip wasn't just a mistake, it was a revelation. It showed how readily performance breaks down under pressure, and how meaningless phrases look when faced with clear, quiet truth. But the real concern was, what will happen the next time someone like Pete goes into that room, assuming that charm and confidence can make up for a lack of substance? By the end of the week, the fight between Crockett and Hegseth had grown into something far more than a political fight. It had turned into a case study. There was a lot of talk about it in the media. Podcasts made it easier to understand. Professors at college played it in class. People who didn't care much about politics started to speak up, not because they cared about the hearings, but because they saw something that felt rare, a time when someone expressed the truth without yelling. The power came from the restraint. Many people, including teachers, veterans, journalists, and even some people who call themselves conservatives, shared their thoughts on social media. They weren't bonded by their political beliefs, but by how calm Jasmine was. They weren't clapping for her because she was loud or flamboyant. They were appreciating her for not being rude. One person said, "You don't have to yell to make a point." This woman just gave him every word he's ever said and let him argue with himself. That one comment got 48,000 likes in 2 days. Late-night comedy shows, on the other hand, weren't as strict. One clip showed Jasmine quietly holding her papers next to Pete, whose face was frozen in a state of anger. The caption said, "When you realize you should have stayed on TV." But in the real world, people were having actual conversations. A local news anchor in Toledo, Ohio, led a panel on media ethics, using the hearing as a starting point. A town hall meeting in Portland, Maine, talked about Crockett as an example of civic responsibility. Jasmine didn't want to be in the spotlight, but it found her. When she got back to D.C., she got interview requests from networks she didn't even work with very often. MSNBC wanted her. PBS did too. Some conservative radio shows even called her up, not to argue with her, but to inquire how she got so ready. Most of them she turned down. "Let the clip do the talking," she advised Lena, her assistant. And it did. An older man sat at the counter of a diner in Gary, Indiana, and read the newspaper. Page 2 has the picture of Jasmine at the hearing. He touched the picture with his knuckle and told the waitress, "That lady, she didn't blink." That's how you do it. A local moms organization in Springfield, Missouri, tweeted the video with the statement, "Teaching our daughters that strength doesn't mean shouting." And the comments below, they weren't about the party. They were about tone, getting ready, and the truth. But not everyone was happy. People who supported Pete sought to save what they could. His co-host on his network show tweeted, "Pete Hegseth served this country. He deserves respect, not ambush." But the answers just kept coming. One stated, "Respect is earned in the room, not on the resume." Another said, "She didn't surprise him. She brought notes. He brought attitude." The most hurtful responses weren't the loud ones. They were the ones that showed disappointment. People who had once liked Pete for his unashamed patriotism were now wondering what he was up to. Not because they had different political views, but because it suddenly appeared like he had been playing a character and Jasmine had pulled back the curtain. The effects didn't stop there. Congressional committees started talking about whether media figures should have to go through more thorough background checks before being asked to testify. Think tanks made declarations about the difference between criticism and expertise. Even some of her colleagues, lawmakers who had never given Jasmine much credit, were suddenly requesting her to help with future hearings. She stayed calm, which is something most people didn't expect her to do. She kept it specific. She didn't say anything rude. She was honest. And the truth. It's what it always does when it gets the mic, it echoed. But no one expected this hearing to become into more than just a viral event. It would serve as a point of reference, a change in the tide, and a message that the loudest voice isn't always the stronger one. By the weekend, the hearing had changed from a popular event to a deeper look at something that people had been yearning to see but couldn't quite put into words until now. It was no longer about Democrats and Republicans. It wasn't even about Pete Hegseth or Jasmine Crockett as people. It was about credibility. People were worn out. I'm sick of the show. Sick of sound bites that just lasted long enough to cause problems. And sick of experts who only seemed to talk when it was good for their brand. Jasmine Crockett had shown that she was tired, whether she meant to or not. She didn't say anything bad about Pete. She didn't have to. She proved that someone might stand on principle and preparation instead of popularity. That a person can stand up to power not by being loud, but by being exact. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't really loud, but it was true. And in a time when real is getting harder to find, it stayed. A professor at a local community college in Lansing, Michigan, streamed the whole hearing for a political science class. One of the students raised their hand when it was over. "Is that what real accountability looks like?" The professor stopped and then nodded. "That's about as close as you're going to get these days." That was the lesson. Jasmine's harsh handling of the hearing didn't simply make the news. It made sense because it was patient, because it wouldn't bend, because it had power. It often forgot what it was intended to do. In the meantime, the ripple effect was still spreading through the halls of Capitol Hill. Some junior politicians from both parties started to look over the rules on how their staff should prepare. Briefings for hearings came to contain entire background packages on every invited speaker. These packets included not only resumes, but also recordings, records, and receipts. They began to say, "pull a Crockett" in staff slang. It signified be ready, come true, come down. But not everyone liked the change. A few members of the committee who had pushed for Pete to testify were still angry behind closed doors, saying that the hearing had been hijacked or stopped. But they didn't have a lot to stand on. The video didn't lie. And no amount of damage control could change the picture of a panicked pundit falling apart when asked calm, deliberate questions. That's when the real talk started to happen behind the scenes. Why was it okay for a political analyst to talk on national security policy in the first place? Was that what the people wanted, talk instead of action? People in politics were no longer merely whispering that question. People were asking it at home, in school, and at lunch counters all around the country. What is the standard now? Who gets the mic, and why? And more importantly, who is brave enough to tell the truth when it's hard? Jasmine Crockett reminded folks of it. That clarity doesn't always make a lot of noise. It might come in with a folder, open it discreetly, and let the facts speak for itself. That was almost revolutionary in a world that loves disorder. Most people feel this way but don't say it out loud. We don't need additional noise. We need more folks who are ready. People who care enough to be exact and pay attention. People who don't just talk about being accountable, they do it. And maybe that's why Jasmine's moment was so powerful. It wasn't about pride. It wasn't about getting ahead. It was about rules. Not just in politics, but in how we talk, how we act, and how we show up. But once people stopped talking about the tape and started talking about what it meant, one last question came up. How can we hold others accountable if we don't first hold ourselves accountable? 3 weeks after the hearing, the excitement had faded down. Headlines changed. A new scandal. One more vote. More noise. That's how it always is in Washington. Noisy, quick, and forgetful. But this one stuck with me for some reason. Not because it blew up. Not because it ended jobs or made people famous right away. But it showed people something they hadn't seen in a long time. How to walk into a room and not raise their voice and still be in charge. For a lot of people, that moment was less about politics and more about thinking about themselves. Jasmine Crockett didn't only point out the inconsistencies in someone else's story. She told individuals that understanding the facts can make you stronger. Strength in keeping calm, and the strength to choose content over show. In a time when it seems like public personalities are rewarded for outbursts and the loudest individual always gets the last word, this hearing changed everything. The person with the quietest voice made the sharpest cut, and they didn't have to brag about it afterward. People who had been talked over at work really felt it. 4 ladies who had been looked down on in meetings. 4 young professionals who were told they weren't ready to speak up. For anyone who had ever kept quiet, not because they didn't know what to say, but because they were waiting for the appropriate time to say it. That was the moment Jasmine found. And she did something unusual with it. She didn't stand up for herself. She didn't fight. She made it clear. In the weeks that followed, schools started giving out the transcript of the hearing for students to talk about. It was quoted in leadership courses. Corporate trainers even started talking about the discussion, offering it as an example of how to communicate well when the stakes are high. Not because it was exciting, but because it was real. And maybe that's the point. There are already enough performers in the world. It doesn't need more people talking merely to be heard. It needs people who listen and talk with a purpose. People need to ask better questions. It needs leaders who know that the truth is strongest when you don't have to dress it up. Jasmine Crockett didn't win because she owned someone. She triumphed because she cared more about the process than the performance. She didn't make a show out of the hearing. She made it a time of clarity. And by doing this, she gave people something to grasp onto, a reminder that you don't have to match someone's volume to make it go away, that you may be the most powerful person in the room, even when things are going wrong. Being correct doesn't imply being loud. It requires being ready. Remember this the next time you feel like you're being underestimated, interrupted, or outshouted. You don't have to overpower. You don't have to do anything. You just need to know what you're talking about and say it like it matters. That's what Jasmine did, and people all throughout the world saw it. If this tale made you ponder, made you stop and consider, or even just grin at the prospect of calm winning for once, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that show us what genuine power is, because the whole world is watching. And occasionally, a single steady voice can change everything.